Fazineh started the Innocence Lost Foundation, whose mission is to build rehabilitation centers to provide education, skills training, and therapy to former child soldiers in Sierra Leone. Please welcome Fazineh Keita.
Hello everyone. It's nice to see you all here today. My name is Fazineh. It's not a common name in Canada, but if you want to remember it, think about fascinate without the T. It's an honor to be here today with you to commemorate and remember not only the brave soldiers who fought for our freedom, but also for the civilians who are being killed, civilians who have been killed in wars around the world. From Africa all the way to Iraq, civilians are being killed in Syria with impunity. Civilians have been bombarded in Yemen and are still being bombarded in Yemen with impunity. Now imagine if you're a kid and a bomb, say you go out to fetch water, and a bomb come and land on your house and kill your parent. Do you think it takes a lot of convincing to convince that kid to fight? Definitely not. In countries around the world, children are being indoctrinated and recruited and used as child soldiers. There are over 300 child soldiers in the world, 300,000. And that's just an estimate, because when I was a kid, when I was a child soldier, no one would have come and count me where I was. So those are just the figures we know. Children are indoctrinated and used as combatants in the front lines. Sometimes they're used as sex slaves, spies, cooks, servants. Children are being indoctrinated in certain parts of the world and they're used as suicide bombers. I was raised in Sierra Leone. If you've seen the movie Blood Diamond, it's about Sierra Leone. We gained independence in 1961. Following independence, Sierra Leone was governed by corrupt dictators who mismanaged the natural resources of the country. So not only did we suffer years of colonial exploitation, we went from that straight to dictators who mismanaged all the natural resources and left the economy in ruins. As a result, civil servants weren't getting paid, teachers weren't getting paid. There was a lot of discontent in the country. And then there comes Fazineh, the rebel leader, with a small band of rebels. And then he said, if people fight for him, he's gonna fix all the problems of the country. Just like a crooked politician will tell you, if you vote for me, I'm gonna fix all your problems. Instead of telling you, if you vote for me, I just want power because I like power. And as people started fighting for Fazineh, it didn't take long for people to realize he was worse than the government he was fighting. So people stopped fighting for him. As a result, when he started suffering to recruit soldiers, so he started attacking towns. He would kill the grown-ups and kidnap the kids and take them to camp and train them and use them and unleash them on the next town, and they'll go kill the grown-ups in that town and kidnap all the children and bring them to the camp and train them. And the training was just how to put together an AK-47, clean it, how to shoot, and then the rest they expect you to learn it as you go. I was taken right before my 9th birthday. And when I was taken to the camp in the jungle. And they taught us how to dismantle an AK-47, how to put it together, how to fight. And then they indoctrinated us before they sent us to battle. And the indoctrination was simple. It was, we have all these natural resources in the country. Your parents' generation didn't fight the corrupt government that were exploiting this country. That's why you have to fight, not only for you, but for the generation to come. And as a kid, you believe that, and I believe that. But when we started fighting and I started burying my friends and I became part of the organization, I realized that I'm just a pawn. I'm just being used, just like all of us. So I escaped the rebels, and then I returned back. But what war does is scatter families, so I wasn't able to find my families, and I was hungry, and I needed a place to stay. So I went and joined the army because they can provide you that. They can provide you a place to stay. So unlike the rebels, the army never forced to recruit children, but they just give you they show you the opportunities that you can get and tell you can have food if you join us. And so kids join them, and I joined them. And I was with them when I finally realized my uncle has returned back to Tongofield and he started his business. So I went back to my uncle and I went back to school. And then I realized being a civilian was worse than when I was with the soldiers, because civilians were the ones that were being killed. Civilians are attacked by both sides. Civilians are caught up in the crossfire. And when the soldiers want to take a town, instead of just going in, they will just bombard the town for hours. So for every one enemy they kill, 50 or 60 civilians' bodies are laid on the ground. And I realized that was even harder than fighting. So that's why when I found out about the white poppy and making room to commemorate civilians, it spoke deeply to me and it meant a lot to me. Sometimes it feels overwhelming. There's wars everywhere. It's like, what do I do? Where do I even start? White supremacy is on the rise. Racial discrimination, sexual discrimination, gender discrimination, religious discrimination. People are making money off of that, just like people are making money off of war. Because the war in Sierra Leone, we didn't make any weapons, but we had weapons in abundance. And then I think, but maybe it's better now than Second World War. But at the same time, the planet wasn't warming up like back then. And because of climate change that the media is not talking a lot about, there are countries around the world like Nigeria, Niger, Chad, where cattle herders who've been herding their cattle on the piece of land for over 400 years and now are moving further inland because of all the flooding. Now they're encroaching on the land of the farmers who are fighting back, and civilians are getting killed in that process. So when it feels overwhelming, there was a time when I just didn't want to do anything, and then I realized maybe I should just start opening doors for people. Because before that, I would open doors for older ladies, and when I saw a young guy, like, nah, you open your own door. But then when I started opening doors, I realized there are more people opening doors in this city. Sometimes you have to beat them to it. Like, no, I am going to open that door. So when it feels overwhelming, sometimes just smile at a stranger. Just be kind to a stranger. Come together as we have come together as a community to commemorate the victims of war. So I thank all the organizers of this event, and I thank you all for coming here today. Thank you very much.
To commemorate children killed, injured, or orphaned by war. The background circle of greenery is made by the handprints of the children at this nearby school. Two local high school students, Anya Murray and Illy Mendoza Mayers, are you both from Lord Byng? From Lord Byng Secondary School, are joining us today to lay our wreath. So you can go on. Thank you so much. The next wreath is to recognize the strength and commitment of those who dared to resist war and the persecution they often face. Can you go right? The strength and commitment of those who dared to resist war and the persecution they often face, whether motivated by religious faith, secular moral values, or a practical belief that war is wasteful and ineffective, we honor their actions and their memory. The wreath will be placed by George, one of our volunteers. He comes from a country where there's still an involuntary military draft, and from which there's still a threat of that. He chose not to serve regardless of the consequences. He, like many others, did not want to be trained how to kill people. He believes that there are better ways to serve one's community, one's country, and humanity as a whole. Thank you, George. Okay. This wreath, with its beautiful but damaged poppies, reflects the challenges faced by survivors and victims suffering from post-traumatic stress. Insomnia, flashbacks, and anxiety are normal and sometimes healthy responses to violence or trauma. But some survivors are left with severe, long-lasting symptoms and need ongoing treatment to help them cope. It can be hard even for Canadian veterans to get the necessary help. And it's harder still for civilians living in refugee camps and war zones, or refugees fleeing from them. This year, we are pleased to have vast volunteers, Sadiq Mohibi and Abbas Koshal, to lay the wreath. VAST assists refugees and other newcomers who have endured torture, trauma, and political violence through counseling, documentation, education, and referrals. Thank you very much. Thank you. The next wreath is for Indigenous victims of genocide and cultural destruction. From first contact through to the present day, Indigenous peoples worldwide have been and continue to be victims of both overt and covert wars on their cultures and existence. Our wreath of local red cedar is symbolically wound with invasive English ivy, a plant infamous for suppressing and killing native vegetation. On the attached leaves are some of the brutal tactics Indigenous peoples have faced. This wreath will be jointly laid by local First Nations elder Ravenwing, Lorelei Hawkins, with her granddaughter, Miss Hummingbird Woman, Cassandra Simeon, and Dr. Chandu Claver, an Indigenous Igorot physician and human rights activist from northern Philippines. In 2006, Dr. Claver survived an assassination attempt that took the life of his wife. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. The red and white poppy buds on this wreath symbolize the precarious position of child soldiers. Neither civilian nor military, their childhoods are cut violently short. Even those who escape may suffer lasting harm from the acts they've seen. This wreath is being laid by Ava van der Staren, director and co-founder of the Innocence Lost Foundation, which is working to bring attention to the plight of child soldiers everywhere and to improve the lives of former child soldiers in Sierra Leone. Thank you, Ava. The medical aid wreath features shocking photos of bombed ambulances and poppies whose centers bear the emblems of the International Red Cross Network. Those emblems are supposed to guarantee protection and neutrality, but all too often they become targets instead. We are pleased to have Holly Heath, a registered nurse who works at St. Paul's Hospital, laying this wreath for us. Thank you, Holly. The next wreath is dedicated to women raped and victimized in wartime, crimes as old and terrible as war itself. Its symbols recognize both women's strength and their vulnerability. Conflict zones and even refugee camps can be exceptionally dangerous for women who may be assaulted or pressured to trade sexual services for food, safe passage, or other necessities for themselves and their families. Here to lay our wreath today is Red Elk singing woman, Darla Blackkettle, from Siksika Blackfoot Nation, which is presently located outside of the place which is now called Calgary. Thank you so much. The red and white poppy buds on this one. Excuse me. Okay, here we go. Got it. The next wreath represents refugees fleeing conflict. This is the largest group of civilian war victims and the one most in the news these days. Canada gains from the skills and diversity they bring, but their homelands suffer a corresponding loss. Even the ones lucky enough to find safe haven carry with them the heartbreak of leaving their homes and often their families. This year we have Diana G., a local pastor at Faith Community Christian Church, which has sponsored a family of Syrian refugees. Thank you so much. This wreath mourns the lost potential of an estimated 50 million children whose education is disrupted by war. Some of the luckier ones end up in our local schools, but others may spend their entire youth in refugee camps with no access to formal schooling. The wreath will be placed by Hans Gerhard Fast, who was not able to complete grade 1 in his hometown because he had to flee to Denmark during World War II. During his time in a Danish refugee camp from 1945 to 48, he was able to do some more schooling, finishing grade 5. After moving to South America, he completed 1 year of schooling in Spanish, but at age 13, his formal schooling ended because he had to work to help his family survive. Thank you so much. This oil-soaked wreath represents the environmental devastation caused by war. The huge military footprint is a major contributor to global warming and one we should remember when discussing local pipeline and tanker issues. Patricia Plackett, chair of the Suzuki Elders, will place it on behalf of the David Suzuki Foundation. The foundation is a leading Canadian environmental nonprofit organization which empowers people to take action in their communities on the environmental challenges we collectively face. Thank you so much. Our final universal wreath is labeled for peace, because in addition to mourning what has been lost to war, we are also here to show our commitment to work for peace and a better world for all. Our final wreath today is laid in memory of the many Japanese Canadians who were dispossessed and their communities destroyed due to forced internments during World War II. Laying the wreath today is Judy Hanazawa, President of the Greater Vancouver Japanese Canadian Citizens Association, an organization which has served Japanese Canadians since the 1950s. Today, the group focuses on anti-racism, human rights activism, and education, supporting community social and cultural events, and publishing a monthly news magazine with Canada-wide distribution. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all our wreath layers. For some of them, coming out to lay a wreath in front of all you people has been a very brave act. And now I'd like to invite Earl Peach and the Solidarity Notes Choir to lead us in singing Song of Peace, Finlandia. The words are in your program, so please join in.
There is freedom somewhere. There is justice somewhere. There is justice somewhere. I'm gonna keep on until I find it. There is justice somewhere.
Sent off to battle and of those who died. Every November 11th, wreath-laying ceremonies are common throughout Canada, Britain, and other countries in the Commonwealth. The White Peace Poppy campaign seeks to expand what it means to remember about war, as well as who we remember. Teresa Gagne is co-founder of the White Peace Poppy campaign in Canada. Fazineh Keita was a child soldier in Sierra Leone. He is one of the founders and director of the Innocence Lost Foundation, which seeks to build rehabilitation centers for former child soldiers and youth in Africa. They will both be participating in this Monday's White Poppy wreath-laying ceremony at the Seaforth Peace Park at the south end of the Burrard Street Bridge. And Teresa Gagne and Fazineh Keita are both here with me in the studio. Hello, Teresa and Fazineh.
Hi, it's great to be here.
It's wonderful to be here again.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Teresa, when and where was the White Poppy first introduced?
The white poppy was introduced first in Britain only about 12 years after the red poppy, so in the early 1930s. 1933, I think, was the first year that it appeared at an Armistice Day event. And the next year, the Peace Pledge Union in Britain started distributing white poppies, and they've been doing it ever since.
And what were the circumstances surrounding the introduction of the White Poppy?
It was introduced by primarily by women from the Women's Cooperative Guild, and what they saw and sensed in Britain was that the messages that it had been hoped had been learned by World War I, the war to end war, that those messages had been lost. They could see that there was a growing militarism, and they wanted to counter that and get out the pacifist message that war doesn't work, doesn't solve international.
And how does the White Poppy differ from the more traditional red one?
Well, the red one has certainly up until this year been seen as being pretty much exclusively intended to commemorate Allied soldiers, living or dead, and in Canada, basically in conflicts that Canada had taken part in. This year, actually, the British Legion for the first time has said on their website that it could also be used to commemorate civilian victims of terrorism, so that's a big movement on their part. In Canada, the red poppy is still very much seen and put forward by the Legion as a commemoration of the valor of Canadian soldiers. The white poppy is intended to commemorate all the victims of war and to draw attention to the fact that recent estimates are that 90% of victims of contemporary wars are civilians. And the other things that the white poppy is intended to do, as we say on the little cards that we hand out, this year wear a white poppy to commemorate all victims of war, to mourn the environmental devastation it causes, to reject war as a tool for social change, to call for dialogue and peaceful conflict resolution, and to show your commitment to building a better future. And our slogan is that remembering is important, but it isn't enough.
And to add to that, I really like the idea of the peace poppy that military means doesn't always necessarily end war. So if you think about before we went to Iraq, before America invaded Iraq, we were dealing with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was the big issue, right? But when they went to Iraq, Al-Qaeda opened a branch in Iraq called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which later developed and became ISIS that ended up killing a whole lot of people. And so it's like war only begets war. So we have to start thinking as a society of better means of ending war. And like when people are being exploited, instead of we all just sit down and pretend it's happening far away, we need to start bringing awareness to that.
Now, another one thing I noticed, Teresa, here in the studio, you're wearing both a red poppy and a white poppy. So that has me wondering, does the organizers behind the white poppy, whether back in Britain or here, do they see that as any sort of conflict with the red poppy, or just an extension? I
don't really think so. The Peace Pledge Union in Britain is primarily a pacifist organization, and the original Peace Pledge, which was and still is to this day signed by members, is a complete rejection of war in all its forms. But the wearing of the white poppy, I think, for most people is as varied and nuanced as indeed the wearing of the red poppy. There are people who wear the red poppy to show their unwavering support for the military. There are other people who may think that war is an absolutely terrible idea, but wear it in memory of great Uncle Willie who died at Ypres. You know, I think it's wrong to try to say, based on a simple symbol, because you're wearing that, you believe these sets of things. I think it's very nuanced, but I do think that the core things, the criticality of remembering all victims of war and the rejecting of both war as a means of international conflict resolution, but beyond that, one of the things that the Peace Pledge Union and Vancouver Peace Poppies are trying to do is to try to work to make people aware and weaken the normalization of war and war terminology in our culture. There's so many subtle ways that we refer to the war on cancer and winners and losers and beating and defeating, and when what we could instead be using terms like struggle and solving and resolving that are more positive terms that don't build into our let it lead us to internalize the idea that war and struggle and winning are good things.
Moving on to the wreath-laying ceremony on Monday, that I understand is fairly recent to Vancouver. How did that begin?
Yeah, we've been distributing poppies since 2008, but the ceremony, our first ceremony, was in 2016, so this will be our fourth one this year. And really what happened is we'd been distributing the poppies for a number of years. The responses had been very positive, and it seemed like now was a good opportunity to kind of move things up to the next phase, to actually have something on Remembrance Day. And so I kind of conceived of the idea of using some of the elements of the traditional Remembrance Day series, so having music, wreaths, an outdoor event, but using it to broaden it and to create a more inclusive event that would both reflect the broader positions of Canadians on war and remembrance, and that would help to make Remembrance Day more relevant to newer Canadians, immigrant communities who might not have a connection with the traditional, let's remember the Allied soldiers who lost their lives in the world wars. So it's been very successful that way, very well received, and we've had representatives of many different communities participating every year.
How did you come to meet and invite Fazineh to participate in this year's ceremony?
Well, when I was coming up with kind of a list of what I think of as the universal wreaths, which is the first part of our ceremony, they were wreaths to represent not individual wars, but groups that suffer over and over again in conflict down through the years and indeed centuries. So women, refugees, and one of the groups that came to my mind was child soldiers. And so I had decided we would create this wreath for child soldiers, and I was just kind of Googling and phoning around trying to get responses, and I hadn't heard back from anybody. And I happened to be talking to the friend of a friend, and she said, oh, my daughter has a friend who was a child soldier in Sierra Leone, and she connected us with Fazineh and his partner Abba, and they were right away on board. They were very interested, and so they laid the child soldiers wreath at our 2017 ceremony, and this year we're so thrilled to have Fazineh Beck as our keynote speaker to talk about the plight of child soldiers in general and about his personal story.
And the amazing thing about it, when she invited me, I was, because we our foundation, we talk about child soldiers and war and stuff, right? And when she invited me, when I saw the Peace Poppy and that they stood for civilians, like my whole world stopped, because I grew up in war. I know the importance, I know how many civilians pay the price. It terrified me to the point, because for a while I get caught up in talking about the war and growing up as a child soldier, and there was a moment when I refused to allow myself to think about the amount of civilian victims that I saw. So when she invited me, it's like it came to me. It was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense, and I was really encouraged that they were doing that, and I wish a lot of people can bring awareness to that, so they can think about war as a general, like a big term instead of just one focus.
So as the featured speaker on Monday's ceremony, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're planning to talk about?
Well, I want to talk about child soldiering because it's still happening. Like currently we have over 300,000 child soldiers, but that's just the ones that are like statistically recorded. Because when I was a child, like I never saw anyone come and count me. Like you wouldn't go where I was, right? So even that 300,000 number is just the number on paper. So I believe it's a lot higher. So I want to bring attention to that, and I want to bring attention to our current plight in the world right now. Russia and Al-Assad, they're still bombing civilians in Syria, right? So we civilians are dying right now as we're speaking, right? So we need to bring awareness to that. So I want to touch on that a little bit and try to thank people for taking their time to come out there and remember people.
I know, just looking through the Innocence Lost website, there's a brief mention about your story in Canada.
Yeah, in few words, the Sierra Leone gained independence from Britain in 1961. So following years of colonial exploitation, we went straight into dictatorship. So Sierra Leone get governed by dictators who mismanaged the natural resources of the country. So there was a lot of discontentment. So when Fazineh came with his band of soldiers and he said he's gonna fight to fix all the problems in the country, everyone thought, oh, this guy is coming to help us. So he started recruiting people, and then people realized he was worse than the government. So they stopped fighting for him, and then that's when he changed his strategy drastically to attack a town, kill as much grown up as he can, and then take these kids, disconnect them from their family, and take them to camp and train them. So when they attacked the town I was staying, it's called Tongafield in Sierra Leone, right before my 9th birthday, and I was taken to their camp, and I was trained, and the training was just like how to dismantle and put together an AK-47, and the rest they expect you to learn it on the way. And to indoctrinate us didn't take much, because there was a lot of injustice, because a lot of people think indoctrination, you have to be dumb to be indoctrinated. Indoctrination is they use the injustices that you suffer. And then they said, if you, just like a crooked politician would say, if you vote for me, I'm going to give you this and that, instead of saying I want power. So it's the same thing. So I fought. When they took me to camp, after that I started fighting for them, and then I escaped, and then I later joined the soldiers because I didn't have a place to go, and I fought for them back and forth. There were times when I would escape. Sometimes I fight for them because I didn't have a family to take care of me, and then there are times when I go back there. And then when the war ended, I just didn't want to stay there to help fix the country. I thought, you stole my childhood there already, I gotta get out. So I tried to come to Canada, but it didn't work out at that time. So I went and released a political album, music album against the government. And then they started sending me threatening letters, and then I applied again. And I had a friend already from here that was helping me. And then I went again, and I said, I only released an album against corruption in my country, and now my government is trying to kill me. So through that, they were able to look at my application again. They brought it up again because they've already denied me. So and then I was able to come to Canada, and then I ended up in Alberta in June, and I came there, and I got out of the plane, and I thought it was so cold. I put on a bunch of jacket and a toque, and the people came to pick me up, were like, why are you so dressed up with all this jacket and toques? And I'm like, oh, because it's cold. And they're like, oh, you have no idea what you're in for. So that's how I came to Canada, and that was my first Canadian experience, and that's how I got in the door.
If you were in the studio, you'd see that Fazineh is still wearing his toque. Maybe after taking it off, he got here.
Yeah, it is a little chilly in here, but, and maybe just a brief word about the foundation that you co-founded, The Innocents Lost.
Yeah, we're aiming to bring healing and opportunities to communities and child soldiers who missed out on their education. We want to provide education programs where they can get diplomas to either continue further their studies or get employment. We want to give them skills training, and we want to provide art therapy, because I got healed because of I'm an actor and a writer, and I play music, and that's how I started. All my healing process happened along that line. So we want to provide this art therapy for people, because art is really, really big there. And so we just want to heal the community and expand the program.
Why do you think symbols such as the white poppy and rituals like the wreath laying ceremony are still important?
Well, I think, as an African, I was raised with rituals, right? You wake up in the morning, you have rituals you got to do, and to this day, it helped me get out of bed, because sometimes I wake up and I got so busy and I get so down, but it's like, oh, you got to get up, you got to pray in the morning and stuff like that. That's still a ritual, right? So, and humans, sometimes we learn from seeing, and for people to watch, people put wreath and that. It sinks in the reality, because those are lives of people.
And I think that ritual is important for people. It helps them it can intensify the feelings about an event, and that coming together and sharing this event, which actually is an interesting thing, because the original Armistice Day ceremonies were a pause in the workday. All the machineries in the factories stopped, and everybody was there with their colleagues with this 2 minutes of silence. So it was a very collective thing, and I think over the years, one of the things that happened with making Remembrance Day a statutory holiday is that it's no longer this collective pause in everybody's day. It's just become, for a lot of people, just another day to sleep in and shop because you don't have to go to work. So one of our feelings with doing the ceremony was to bring back that collective sense of bringing people together and to help to try to keep Remembrance Day as a relevant and important day, because I think otherwise it's very easy to not think about these uncomfortable things. We're busy with our lives. If we can kind of say, well, this is the day where we stop and we think and we get together with other people, and the fact that you're there and you see this gentleman from South Sudan last year with his 2-year-old daughter laying a wreath, that you see a local Japanese woman who was a victim of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima there to lay a wreath, it really brings home to you the civilians. And Vancouver is full of people who have had experiences of war, and we want to give them a chance to collectively share that emotion, grieve their losses, and get together to commit ourselves. That's the other thing, to get together to commit ourselves to pressure our governments to find a better way. Canada could be a leader in training people in conflict resolution, in translators and facilitators. We could be exporting that as a resource to the world, learning how to help people listen to each other so they can solve their problems, instead of thinking, well, if we just provide them with a better trained police force, their life will get better.
Definitely.
The Peace Poppy campaign has been in Canada just over a decade now. How has the response been over the years?
Well, we started in 2008 with 50 handmade poppies, and this year we expect to distribute about 6,000 of the white cloth lapel poppies that we import from Britain. There's also a very large campaign in Quebec from the Peace Collective Échec à la Guerre. Our estimates, it's hard to get exact numbers because there are also many individuals making their own poppies or importing 50 poppies or whatever themselves from Britain that we might not know about, but my estimate would be that there's well over 15,000 Canadians every year who are wearing a white poppy, some of them with the red and some of them on their own. So it's been very heartening, and the response to the ceremony has been uniformly positive. People really appreciate it and they want to see it continue.
So tell us, when and where will the wreath-laying ceremony take place?
So the ceremony takes place from 2:30 to 4 on Monday, November the 11th at Seaforth Peace Park, which is at First and Burrard in Vancouver. It's a park most people don't know the name of. It's across from the Seaforth Armories, but it's the park where all Vancouver's big peace marches in the 1980s started, from that grassy patch there, and it is actually an international peace park with a memorial fountain in the middle, and so it's a very appropriate place for the ceremony, which goes rain or shine, though obviously we're hoping for no rain, and it includes music, poetry, participatory singing, as well as the short talks.
And the time, 2:30, is meant to not conflict with the ceremonies down at the Centre.
Yes, we consciously made a decision to do it that way, and that way, if people want, they can attend both.
Well, it's been a great pleasure for me to have you both come down and meet you both, and I thank you very much for all your work.
Yeah, thank you very much. You guys are doing a great work here. There's a lot of community communication going on. We thank you guys, and we hope you guys keep it up too. Thank you very much.
I've been talking to Teresa Gagne and Fazineh Keita. They will both be participating in the Remembrance Day White Poppy Wreath-laying ceremony, and it's going to take place on Monday, November 11th at 2:30 p.m. at the Seaforth Peace Park. The park is located on Burrard Street between Cornwall and First Avenue. You can learn more about the White Peace Poppy by visiting peacepoppies.ca, and you can learn more about the Innocence Lost Foundation by visiting innocencelostfoundation.com. And you're listening to Red Eye on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, and streaming worldwide at coopradio.org.